Got another nice little streamer fly here. Going to tie today. This is called the Moto Minnow. I was originally introduced to this fly many years ago as a smallmouth fly here in central Indiana, but originally I think this was a trout fly. Seeing this tied in a number of different configurations, it's really a basic fly. It's kind of like a woolly bugger. It's got a marabou tail. The whole body is actually hackled or feathers. There's no underbody or anything with a white collar on the front. This particular version is using some Guinea fowl for the hackles on the body, but you can use pheasant, you could use Hungarian partridge, grouse, any kind of speckled feather, even like a speckled hen or something. Very, very simple fly to tie. Nice little fly to have in your box if you happen to be out targeting fish with streamers. And that's the Moto Minnow. We'll go ahead and get started. Normally we start our flies by putting our hook in the vise, but for the Moto Minnow, because we have a gold cone on the front of it, first thing we have to do is thread that cone onto the hook, then we can place our hook in the vise. The hook in the vise, I'll go ahead and debarb it. This is a Mustad R72 in a size 6. I tied these on anything from a size 4 on down to a size 10. Just depends on the size and the profile of the bait fish you want, as well as the species that you're after. I'm going to put some lead wraps along the hook shank to help get this down a little bit more. This is a 0.020 lead wire. And I'm going to put about 15 wraps of lead right along the hook shank. Smooth all that off, and then I'm going to push all of those lead wraps right up behind the eye of the hook. As you can see, this particular cone, the smaller opening up front's a little bit on the large size, but that will take care of itself and you won't see any of those lead wraps. For thread, I'm using two different threads on this. The first is a UTC 140 Denier in white. And the reason for this is, as I'm tying in the tail, I'll be going back and forth a little bit on the hook shank here, and this helps just to move around on the hook shank just a little bit better. We'll be switching over to a smaller thread size to actually finish the body and finish the fly. I want to put down a base layer of thread. I'm going to leave my thread at the end of the shank for tying in the tail. The Moto Minnow is a very, very simple fly. Basically, is a marabou tail. I'm using, this is a white blood quill marabou. I'm going to use this and tie this in as the tail, and then the body is made up of some sort of soft hackle. I think originally it was a Hungarian partridge. At least some of the articles and things that I found, they use a Hungarian partridge. The first Moto Minnow that I came across was the body was made of pheasant rump feathers. Anyway, I'm using, this is a dyed olive Guinea, and I'm going to use these because I like the markings on them. And then for the front collar, we're going to use a whiting American saddle in a white. But a strung saddle or even a schlappen feather would work for this. It's up to you. So I'll prep my marabou for the tail. I'm going to tie this in a little bit longer than a hook shank. I just like mine a little bit long. it's going to be a pretty full body, so I think having a little bit longer tail on this helps this fly. I'm going to lash that down all the way up to those lead wraps. Then I'm going to smooth this out by covering everything with a layer of thread. This is where that larger Denier thread comes in handy, because it will cover just a little bit more on the hook shank as we go back and forth here. This just gives me a nice smooth base for palmering the hackles on for the body. Once I get back to the end of the shank, I'm just going to do a 3-turn whip finish just to secure that thread, and then I will cut the heavier thread off. You certainly don't have to use a heavier thread at that step. It just saves a little bit of time. I'm going to put some head cement all along that just to bind that in a little bit and help secure it. So the Guinea hackles for the body on this, generally it takes 6 to 8. It just depends on the hackles and the length of the body and how tight you wrap them together. I try not to wrap them too tight along here, because otherwise it's just a whole lot of feathers you have to tie in. But the idea is that you're going to pick some feathers with a little bit shorter fibers for the back end here, and as you get up towards the front, then maybe you'll pick a feather or two with some longer fibers. Gives it a bit of a taper. When I select my feather like this, I'm going to prep it by removing all of the fluff off the base. I don't need any of that. And then I'll grab the end of the tip of that hackle, because we're going to tie this in by the tip with my hackle pliers like this. Then I'll stroke back the fibers to get them out of the way, and I can tie that in. The second thread I'm using is a Uni-Thread 8.0 in white. I'm just going to attach my thread right about the point of the hook and wrap it on back. With my Guinea hackle prepped, I'm going to tie in the tip, a couple of wraps, fold it back. I'm not going to concern myself with clipping these out, simply because the tips will just blend in with the rest. I'll advance my thread forward, maybe about an eye length or so, because I'm not getting a whole lot of wraps in on that hackle. Taking the other end of the hackle with my hackle pliers. For the first few, I'm going to wrap my thread in open spiral wraps right up behind the cone here, just to get them out of the way. Stroking those hackles back, I'm just going to start palmering it around. I don't get too hung up if these aren't just perfect. I don't get too worried about folding back each of these hackles. And again, I'm also not going to be putting my wraps directly in front of each other. I get usually about 3 wraps per feather. Unwind my thread and then bind in the stem. And then I can trim away the waste. Securing that down, I like to put a drop of head cement right there just to secure it a little bit. And now we move on to the next feather. So as you'll see, a lot of this is just the whole body is basically made up of the same procedure, but you're just using a little bit bigger feathers in each step. So I'll go ahead and do this one just like I did the previous one. If you get some feather fibers that are stuck going forward, I'm not going to fuss over those. They'll work themselves out, or there'll be plenty of fibers that are sticking out and around. Generally, by the end of the second feather, I'm just right about the point of the hook. Again, I'm going to advance this farther out to get it out of the way, and then I'll start palmering it around. Once this is done, I'll do this another 5 times, maybe 4 times, depends on the length of the body that I start to end up with. One thing you may have to do as you are tying all of this in occasionally is take your bodkin, especially when the fibers start to get longer, take your bodkin and pick some of these out. As these fibers get longer, you may have to put your bodkin in here to go ahead and pick these out. So I'll just go ahead and continue with each one till we get up to the final collar. Last body feather is tied in and wrapped forward, but I want to leave myself almost an eye length, maybe a little bit less, right behind the cone for the front collar. As you noticed, by choosing those feathers of the different sizes, it aids in getting a little bit of a taper in the body as you go from the back to the front. So for my collar, I'm going to choose fairly long Rooster saddle hackle. I want to strip away the fluff. Don't need any of that. And then to help this to palmer correctly, I'm going to strip off just maybe about 1/8 of an inch off of one side. The dull side is actually facing the fly, and I'm taking that off the top. Would be my right side looking at the feather. That way when this starts to palmer, it will actually go straight as opposed to try to twist. I'm going to cut the butt end of that stem just a little bit long like that so it fits right down into the cone. And then I will wrap all of that down nice and neat. You'll notice I have a nice level platform right in here behind the cone for palmering this feather. Start to palmer that around. Notice how it just twists, or I should say turns right over so that the dull side is facing back. And I just palmer this around, each wrap just right in front of the other, stroking fibers out of the way. I'm not going to worry about folding these out of the way as I wrap this. When you get up to the cone, what you'll notice is that those wraps actually start to go forward inside the cone, and that's fine. It just gives us a little bit fuller collar. And I'll palmer this all the way around till I have nothing but just the little tip end right out here to hold on to. Then I will secure the tip end of the feather. It's another reason to use the smaller diameter thread, because in this next step I don't want to wrap and have like a thread collar showing behind the cone. Trim away the excess, stroke everything back, and just get a wrap or two in there to secure it. And then I'll do a 4 or 5 turn whip finish. Careful with your thread wraps. Again, you don't want to have a lot of thread wraps right behind the cone to where you can see you've got a bunch of thread wraps right behind the cone before you get to the feather. You want it to look like that collar's just coming right out of the cone. Trim away my thread. If you have to, you can get your bodkin out to pick any of that out. All looks pretty good. Take some head cement right down behind the cone. That will actually go down in and soak down into those fibers right down into that cone. So there's your Moto Minnow. As I mentioned before, this is a fly that I was introduced to a number of years ago as a smallmouth fly. I think it started out originally as a trout fly, but it has done very, very well for smallmouth. Certainly it'll do very, very well for trout. For the bodies on these, you can use even just, if you don't have guinea or partridge or even pheasant, just use a speckled hen hackle. You can do these in lots of different colors. If you search the internet, you'll see a number of different color patterns that people do with these. I think if you were to do one in a white like this with even a chartreuse would look awfully nice, or an orange. You could do one, say, with brown and orange right in here. Fish that slow along the bottom, you've got a little sculpin and or crawdad imitation. You could add some rubber legs or some flash to this if you want. This is just the basic version. Again, all around, nice little streamer to have in your box. That's the Moto Minnow. Thanks for joining me at Devise today. I hope you learned at least a new pattern, if not a new technique, maybe a tip or trick here and there. If you have any questions about this fly or any of the techniques used in constructing this pattern, please leave them in the comments section down below. If you go to the trouble to ask a question, I'll go to the trouble to answer it. If you'd like to help dressed irons, please share this video with your friends and anybody you think that might enjoy this pattern. Until next time, remember, it's fly tying. If you're not having fun, then you're doing it wrong.